The United States has been in an increasing state of polarization probably since the 2008 election of Barack Obama, depending on who you ask. The 2016 election of Donald Trump probably added some fuel to the fire as well. Add in some increased attention on states' rights issues like election regulations and women's bodily autonomy, and opposing thoughts on how the U.S. should involve itself in the numerous global conflicts happening right now. It seems like the country is already engaged in at least an ideological civil war. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm leaving the theater. Check. All right. This is Ronald, and I am leaving the theater after seeing Civil War. Written and directed by Alex Garland. Starring Kirsten Dunst, Wagner Moura, Cailee Spaeny, Stephan McKinley Henderson, Sonoya Mizuno, Nick Offerman, and Jesse Plemons. And as always, for a complete cast listing, you can go to the link in our show notes. I am not here alone. I am here for a back-to-back week treat with
JC Howard, baby.
Back again, baby.
Back in the building or outside the building.
We've left
the theater.
Okay,
that's
yeah.
right.
All right,
You
get it. Okay, so Civil War is a movie about an imagined civil war in the United States, a modern day civil war in the United States. I'm going to be careful not to say too much more about the plot, not because I care about spoiling, which I'm going to just say up front. We're just going to talk about the movie. I really don't think there's much to spoil here, but I feel like if I say more about the plot, I'm going to start leaning into criticism way too early. So I really just want to hear what you think of this movie, JC Howard.
I'm going to start by saying something that I overheard someone say as we were leaving the theater. A person said, "I need a cigarette, and I don't even smoke." I feel like now the movies are back. Like to me, this movie was intense, but still thoughtful and introspective. I mean, first of all, just carte blanche. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the hell out of this movie from beginning to end. And when I say it was intense, I mean that like I felt my body at different points like feeling like I was holding my breath and like my palms were sweaty and things like that. And it's not necessarily because this movie exactly sets up what is going to happen this year. Like obviously we're in an election year, right? So it's an important time for a movie like this, but it's not saying like this is what's going to happen to America if you elect this person or that person. It's just a matter of, well, arguably, but it's just a matter of like, here's an imagined civil war. And I appreciate the fact that it doesn't exactly set up and say like the South secedes again or something like that. It imagines it differently, and it has like the Western forces, which is an alliance between California and Texas. So it's removed,
which is a commentary itself.
Yes, it is. And anyway, because the political shifts that are also happening in Texas. Anyway, this isn't a 2024 podcast, but you know, it is an interesting kind of alliance that they decided to draw. But I appreciate the fact that it's not exactly our world, but it is definitely a mirror image of our world. And it's not saying that this is what's going to happen, but it's saying like, hey, look, this is what, if there were a civil war, this is kind of what it would look like.
I didn't like this movie.
No, Ronald. Oh my goodness.
I would like to invite all you listeners to one of the best episodes of Leaving the Theater where Ronald disagrees with his guest.
Oh my God, we're going to duke it out. Let's do it. Okay, here, tell me what.
Here's my issue. I think that this is a 4-star premise with a 1-star execution. I think that
what this movie does is, first of all, I think the name is already a misnomer, because I think the idea of just calling it Civil War is clickbait. It is basically saying like, hey, y'all want to see a movie about us imagining the Civil War in the future based on the tensions that are happening right now in 2024. So of course, yes, you got me in the preview, you got me watching it. Yeah. I remember when my friend showed me the trailer for this film. He's like, yo, have you seen this? And he goes, man, this looks awesome. And I remember being like, I think this looks awful for two reasons. One, it reminds me of the reimagining of if the Confederates had won the war that D.B. Weiss and David Benioff were planning to do after Game of Thrones, where I'm like, white dudes come along and they want to imagine, because they can't have any fear in the real world, they imagine these hypothetical scenarios. So I'm like, okay, I'm in. I'm going to go and watch it, and I want to see this hypothetical scenario. Then you don't even give me the hypothetical scenario. You give me shadows of the hypothetical scenario, and then you lace it with a plot line that I hate, which is inexperienced rookie gets veterans killed repeatedly over the course of an hour and 49 minutes. Sure. Now, I'll say the one thing that I will say to this movie's advantage is that it's under 2 hours. Right. It does not overstay its welcome. And that last third, I was at the edge of my seat. You're right. It's a very tense movie. And for that, I think a lot of people are going to, air quote, enjoy this. I don't know if I would watch this a second time. I don't know how I would feel about it. I got
my tickets. I'm already planning on it again, you know?
But I feel like for me, I just don't feel like this movie was saying enough about its actual subject. It's talking about what could happen while also lifting up the press in a very specific way, which I felt a little bit earnest in a way that I did not appreciate, but also like to give the hardened veteran this kind of like, but this one-dimensional, flat kind of like, hey, I'm out here, I'm doing the press job, yes. I'm grizzled. And like, yeah, basically like Kirsten Dunst's role is grizzled reporter. Now, that being said, the one thing I think would have made this movie a little bit better is if they wouldn't have made all of the soldiers on both sides so one-dimensional. They literally, they needed to give them more character, because I needed to know why they would be protecting the press. I needed to know why they would care about what the press was thinking, what the press was reporting. And I also think that if you're going to make commentary about California and Texas being an alliance, you have got to give me more. You can't just say these two states are an alliance and just be like, yep, and then they went right and they went east. They went east. That's what happened. Yeah. And so I feel like, for me, I'm not saying that it was bad because it was poorly executed or poorly shot or poorly acted, but I think in terms of like what he wrote on the page, for me, it was just like he decided, it kind of felt like a cop-out in a lot of ways.
No, I can appreciate that. And I will say that like this, it's not a post-apocalyptic movie, right? Like it takes place like at the start, right? Like as things are happening, but as you say, it doesn't give the like, this is what the linchpin was that made everything go crazy. They hint at it, like, you know, they mention a president's third term and things like that. So there's little hints at what happened, but there isn't an out and out like this is how civilization falls. I will say this, like, I think that this movie does the same thing that Walking Dead does, right? Like, I'm a big Walking Dead guy, or was a big Walking Dead guy when it was on, and it also doesn't tell you anything about how everything happened. There are some like Walking Dead universe things that get into that a little bit, but The Walking Dead as a show, it doesn't tell you how the world fell. It's just like, you know what, they're zombies now, and here we go. And I feel like this is what that was doing. And I personally, I do appreciate a journalist kind of story, like a story that is, or I should say, it's a story that's kind of about journalism alongside, because I was thinking like, how is this movie, before I watched it, I was thinking, how is this movie going to give us a storyline and give us characters to sympathize with without taking sides in the Civil War, right? Like whether, you know, whatever the tensions are that have blown over, how are they going to give us a character that we can like identify with and like it's not cartoonish? Because that was the thing I was kind of afraid of, is that you would come in and you would have like obviously good characters, and then the other side was just blatantly racist and, you know, annoying in those kinds of ways. So it's like, and you had a little bit of that, to be sure. And, you know, I think that I won't give any spoilers, but the intense moment from the trailer is just as intense in the movie, I felt like.
I agree.
And I thought it was very, very good. And I will say, I'm the person who is, air quotes, enjoying this movie. Like, this was, to me, wonderful movie.
That's the thing. It's not, and again, I don't want anyone to walk in this being like, I don't want anyone to walk in this being like, man, this is going to be utter trash from beginning to end. But I feel like if you're listening closely, this movie's not saying anything. And I feel like that's where I have a problem, because I'm just tired of people. There's this sentiment that people have, especially, and maybe this is getting away from the movie, but more of what I'm thinking about people's political views right now is people don't want to take a side. They want to straddle the fence. The Rock just did this quote.
Oh
yes,
my God,
yes.
Rock.
The
Okay,
Rock just did this quote where he says, I wouldn't have endorsed Biden because it created so much division. And it's very amorphous in the way he said it, but he's really trying to just signal to his more conservative fans that, hey, I'm not riding with Biden no more. But also to his more liberal fans, I'm also not going to endorse Trump because it creates air quote division. And I feel like this is a movie that I'm like, listen, man, if you were going to tell me that Jesse Plemons is like a backwoods redneck that is out here killing people because they are not from America, then I'll buy it. Okay, then pick a side. But don't sit here and try to tell me that he's like duplicitous or like this, or not duplicitous, or that he's like in some sort of moral gray area. You know what I mean? And not you. I mean, the filmmaker.
No, I appreciated actually that about it is that like he was clearly a bad guy. Like they did. I agree with you that I wish they had gone into that a little bit more and like poked at some of that. And I don't want to say this was a perfect movie. It was far from perfect. For me, a lot of the writing was so stilted. It was so like just clunky, and it was like it felt like they were delivering lines in some ways. And I don't even blame that on the performances, because the performances by and large were good, but like the writing wasn't perfect. I mean, it was far from perfect, as a matter of fact. Like there were moments where I cringed because I was just like, oh, please don't do that. But I also agree with you. It is a trope, right? It is this story of a young whippersnapper coming up in the world, and you do kind of see, to use an audio term, a crossfade between the character that's the Jesse character and the Lee character. There is kind of like a switching of places in a lot of ways,
which felt really pronounced towards the last third of the movie, where I'm just like, okay, where are we going with this? I get it now. What's going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but so it is a trope, but it's a trope that I feel like, I mean, listen, most movies are tropes, right? There is a story that has been told 1,000 times before, and we're telling it again in this particular way. And this particular way of telling this particular trope, this particular story, I was like, yeah, you got it. You nailed it. That's the way, that is, to me, a good way to tell that story. Of course, conceding the fact that I would have been more interested in some sort of like, this is how the world fell, than this trope of a story. But I do appreciate that trope being told this particular way.
I didn't need the details. But I felt like they alluded to stuff that was more interesting than the movie they gave me. Yeah, they alluded to the fact that that the president dissolved the FBI, or like they pointed to things that we've heard about in rumor mills about what Donald Trump could do.
Project
like
2025.
Exactly. We've seen all about that, but now they're saying like, well, this is what could happen if that happens. And I'm like, I don't know who your audience is, because most of the people who would do the things you're talking about are probably not going to watch this movie. The people that agree with those things are still probably not going to watch this movie. The other thing that bothered me probably the most was there are a lot of people of color just being killed in this movie. There is a black guy on the Western Forces or whatever side who was killed fairly early in the first like violent sections of the movie. There, of course, they show a black guy being lit on fire with a tire, and I was like, I don't know why you just shoved that into my face just to be a flashback memory for the grizzled veteran reporter.
Could have been anybody.
Could have been anybody. Didn't have to be him. Yeah. Then there was the fact that Stephan, like later on, one of the reporters is killed. I think there are two Asian folks that are just like killed so indiscriminately it felt completely unfair. Yeah. And I just felt like there's no, and this is how I know we are firmly in 2024 and people are just sick of wokeism, sick of DEI, that things like this are happening and not one person is saying, hey, how come the white folks keep surviving all of this? Like, what's going on? Like, why are they enduring? Like, what's the thought there?
On that point, Ronald, 10 out of 10, no notes. I echo exactly what you said completely. That is something that bothered me. Another reason this is not a perfect movie, but yes, I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
What he said.
Okay, with all of that being said, where are you falling with your rating on this movie? I think I have an idea.
I am going firmly 4.3. And the reason for that is I absolutely am going to watch it again. I think that this movie does this thing of answering the question of what is journalism? What does journalism do? Who are we? How do we find our place in the story in a way that, and this is for the podcast nerds out there, in a way that Trojan Horse Affair tried to do and failed miserably at. I think that this movie, which is fictional, does that job a lot better. So I'm going to watch it again. I didn't love the writing, didn't love some of the ways that characters were thrown away, but absolutely going to be watching this again.
I give it a 2.99. I will not watch it again. It is not, there is enough redemptive value for me in the third act, especially in the action sequences, that I felt like raised the movie up. I do not think that this movie is as thoughtful as it thinks it is. I think there's a lot of ways in which it gives a shadow of a thought, the same way it gives us shadows of characters throughout. And I think maybe a little bit longer, maybe having somebody else, another writer come in and take a look at this, maybe a writer of color, take a look at this and say, well, what other things could be happening here? What else could we be saying? Like, what more could there be said? I don't think enough was said in it. I won't watch it again, and I know some people will. I won't watch it again, and I think that I know people, I know dear friends that will look at this and say, and not including you, JC, but I know, and I'm speaking specifically of my white friends that will watch this and think that it's saying something. And I think that's what bothers me the most about this movie, is that, like, people are going to watch it and be like, yeah, man, you know what I'm talking about, man? Yo, man, it's right there, man. This could happen, man. And I'm like, I'm not saying that it couldn't, but I'm also saying that, like, I bet you there'd be some more clear-cut ideas about who was on what side in the real life version of this happening.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the next time I watch this movie, I will be probably a lot more critical, but because of the intensity, it kept me engaged and on the edge of my seat. But I do think that the points weren't made as strongly as I wish they were, and it should have picked a side in exactly the way that you're saying. But I just, as a movie, I enjoy it.
I'm interested in your second viewing review of it. Please find me and let me know what you think when you watch it again. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of BigRon Studios. I mixed this episode, and once again, if you're listening to this and thinking this could be mixed a little bit better, you should become a member of our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Leaving the Theater, or go to the link in our show notes. We have behind the scenes footage in our Patreon featuring me and some of my friends just talking on the record, stuff that's not about the movies, just chit-chatting as we walk out of the theater, because I record you as we leave the theater. I don't even think you know that, JC. Again, patreon.com/Leaving the Theater, or go to the link in our show notes. Show art from Heather Wilder. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. For more information about Civil War or JC Howard, check out our show notes. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or Threads at OhitsBigRon. That's at OhitsBigRon. You can find out more about this show and other OhitsBigRon Studios shows by following us on Instagram at OhitsBigRon Studios and on Twitter at OhitsBigRon Stu. That's STEW. Leaving the Theater will be back soon. Thanks for listening. And thanks once again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Western Forces for life.
Honestly, I think the Western Forces were obviously the